So we need to talk about a recent 9-0 unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court involving the Fourth Amendment and its protections against unconstitutional seizures and the use of excessive force by law enforcement and how that impacts your rights. So let's break down what is happening. Now, real quick, if you're watching this channel, then obviously it's safe to say that you care about the Second Amendment and your rights. Now, here's the thing, even law-abiding gun owners are ending up in jail because they make a bunch of critical mistakes. And those are mistakes that you don't even realize that you're making or that you don't understand that they're illegal. So I put together a free resource called the Legal Survival Guide. It's aimed to help you guys avoid all of those traps that maybe you could fall in. It takes about 2 minutes to read. It's just a simple PDF. And it really could save you years behind bars. I made it to help you guys, again, completely free to download using the link down below. It's just something that I wanted to provide you guys for free so that you can have it in your phone or maybe print it out. And there's a little card also in there that you can put in your wallet to give you additional resources to help you in situations. Obviously, not meant to be legal advice. I'm not your attorney. This isn't an attorney-client relationship, but I wanted to provide you guys some free resources to prevent you falling in some bad situations. Again, if you're interested, click the links down below. It's completely free to do. All you have to do is enter your email to get that free PDF. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a recent 9-0 unanimous ruling issued by the Supreme Court. This case involves the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, and also when law enforcement and their activities through excessive force actually implicate that right. This new unanimous decision issued by the Supreme Court came in a case called Barnes versus Felix. This new lawsuit should be on everybody's mind, especially if you're a gun owner, because it involves how courts must analyze these types of situations going forward and maybe when excessive force by law enforcement impacts your Fourth Amendment rights. Although this case is not traditionally dealing with warrantless searches and seizures and those types of issues, the Barnes case directly addresses the seizure doctrine and how the use of force is assessed under the Fourth Amendment. As gun owners, we have seen a lot of highly publicized situations where law enforcement are interacting with potentially lawful gun owners, and through excessive force or a lot of, very critical mistakes, someone like a gun owner ends up getting shot and sometimes is even fatally wounded. This analysis by the Supreme Court directly impacts those types of situations and involves your rights in those types of scary situations. This 9-0 unanimous ruling by the Supreme Court was authored by Justice Kagan, and there was also a lot of concurrences, and that was authored by Kavanaugh, and he was joined by Thomas, Barrett, and Alito. Now, the facts around this case are as follows. Mr. Robert Felix Jr., a law enforcement officer, pulled over an individual, Mr. Ashton Barnes, who was suspected of having toll violations. Officer Felix ordered Barnes to exit the vehicle, and when Barnes opened the door, he acted essentially like he was actually going to exit the car, but then Barnes attempted to drive away. Reacting to that situation in a split second, Officer Felix decided to jump on the ledge of the car as the vehicle was driving away. So since the door was open, the officer could kind of step on the ledge there of the door, and he was on the ledge as the car was driving away. In response to that, he then decided to fire 2 shots at Barnes, fired into the car, hit Barnes, and eventually Barnes was fatally hit and managed to eventually stop the car, but again, he was fatally hit and he passed away. About 5 seconds elapsed between when the car started moving into when it stopped, and about 2 seconds passed between the moment Officer Felix stepped on the door sill, the ledge there, and the moment that he actually decided to fire shots at Barnes. Now, in response to this incident, the mother of Mr. Barnes decided to sue Officer Felix on essentially Barnes' behalf, alleging that the officer there violated Barnes' Fourth Amendment rights against excessive force. The District Court on review granted a summary judgment in favor of Officer Felix, applying the Fifth Circuit's moment of threat rule. This then made its way to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed, explaining that the moment of threat rule requires asking only whether an officer was in danger at the moment of the threat that resulted in his use of deadly force. Under that rule, events leading up to the shooting are not even relevant and could not be considered. Here, the precise moment of threat was the 2 seconds where Officer Felix was clinging to the moving car as Barnes was attempting to escape. And because Officer Felix could then have reason to believe that his life was in danger, the Fifth Circuit panel held and ruled in his favor that it was a lawful shooting. This case eventually made its way to the United States Supreme Court, and the question the Supreme Court was sent to answer, and they decided to answer, was whether courts should apply the moment of threat doctrine as the Fifth Circuit applied, or should they apply something else when evaluating these types of Fourth Amendment claims. On review, the 9-0 unanimous ruling by the court held that A claim that a law enforcement officer used excessive force during a stop or arrest is analyzed under the Fourth Amendment, which requires that the force deployed be objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene. The inquiry into the reasonableness of the officer in that force requires analyzing the totality of the circumstances. That analysis demands careful attention to the facts and circumstances relating to the incident. So in this case, the Supreme Court rejected the more limited moment of threat analysis that was used by the Fifth Circuit, and instead they applied kind of a more comprehensive approach. They looked at the totality of the circumstances, which included things that even happened prior to the actual shooting and that moment of the threat. They stated in the opinion that most notably here, the totality of the circumstances inquiry has no time limit. While the situation at the precise time of the shooting will often matter the most, earlier facts and circumstances may bear on how a reasonable officer would have understood and responded to the later ones. Prior events may show why a reasonable officer would perceive otherwise ambiguous conduct as threatening or instead as innocuous. They go on to state that the moment of threat rule applied below prevents that sort of attention to context and thus conflicts with the court's instructions to analyze the totality of these circumstances. By limiting the view to the 2 seconds before the shooting, the lower courts could not take into account anything preceding the final moment. So, for example, they could not consider the reasons for the stop or the earlier interactions between the suspect and the officer. And because of that, they could not address whether the final 2 seconds of that encounter would look different if set within a longer time frame. A rule like that, they stated, which precludes consideration of prior events in assessing a police officer's shooting, is not reconcilable with the fact-dependent and context-sensitive approach this court has prescribed. They state that a court deciding a use of force case cannot review the totality of the circumstances if it has put on a chronological blinder. They concluded by pointing out that the court does not address a separate question about whether or how the officer's own creation of a dangerous situation factors into the reasonableness analysis here and the type of determination that the court needs to make. So the main thrust of the decision was rejecting the more limited timeless scope analysis applied by, the Fifth Circuit with the moment of threat review. Instead, the Supreme Court orders that lower courts need to look at the totality of the circumstances before and during the incident to get a more comprehensive picture of maybe how the Fourth Amendment could be violated. Now, like I mentioned, there were concurrences authored by Kavanaugh, and that was joined by Thomas, Barrett, and Alito. Now, the concurring opinion really focused on pointing out how dangerous traffic stops actually are for law enforcement officers and how these types of situations result in some of the most fatalities out there for officers. This is one of the times where they're most vulnerable, where there's a lot of fatalities. So the Supreme Court and the concurrence here focus a lot on that. The judges also point out how when a driver like Barnes here decides to pull away, the officers really don't have a lot of good options, and it directly threatens not just their safety, but also public safety. So they focused a lot on that as well in the concurrence. So the court at large rejected the more limited scope of analysis, which is the moment of threat analysis that was used by the Fifth Circuit. But they also focused on the totality of the circumstances, that you need to look at the totality of the circumstances, things that happened before, even during, especially during, and then also, that, is weighed based on, what happens for the public safety, what is for the safety of the officer. You kind of need to look at everything so you can come to the proper decision. Now, this case is important because it impacts everyone's Fourth Amendment protections against excessive force. For gun owners, this is very important right now, especially in light of all of the situations that we've seen kind of pop up, that become high profile, where lawful gun owners are potentially shot by police officers during interactions, when there's force used against lawful gun owners, when these strange situations happen, especially with the ATF, where the ATF are raiding individuals and, situations happen. So there's this push by the Supreme Court here to look at the totality of the circumstances to determine really when is excessive force a violation of the Fourth Amendment. If law enforcement overreacts or misjudges a lawful gun owner's, situation, the totality of the circumstances test can now give courts more leeway to rule in favor of the citizen. So this is a critical decision that I wanted to bring to your guys' attention. It was a 9-0 unanimous ruling in favor of this broader review, totality of the circumstances, really looking at everything to determine when constitutional rights are actually violated. So again, very interesting ruling, impacts constitutional rights, the Fourth Amendment, and it's become even more important for you to understand these things because of what's been happening, these high-profile situations where law lawful gun owners are getting shot by law enforcement because of certain interactions. So if you guys have any questions, go and comment down below, and I will try to answer to the best of my ability. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is, of course, to subscribe to the channel. That helps the channel to grow. Also, you can check out my free legal guide. I will leave a link to it down below where you can sign up. All you have to do is put in your email, and we'll email you the free PDF that you can get. Again, that's just free education for you guys, and we'll send some follow-up emails as well, just for additional, follow-up and some educational information that we're going to send you. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.